Travel with 7 Idea Productions to beautiful British Columbia, Canada, where both Canadian Pacific and Canadian National traverse the rugged Fraser Canyon. This is part of a Trans-Canada rail network for both railways, connecting Vancouver and Montreal, with many places in between. We will follow each line's course through the Fraser River between Hope and the confluence with the Thompson River at Lytton. Both railways operate jointly in the canyon. Eastbounds use Canadian Pacific's Cascade and Thompson subdivisions, while westbounds travel over Canadian National's Ashcroft and Yale subs. One of the many highlights of the canyon are the Cisco Bridges, where both railways cross the river with the CN flying over the CP. Shot in August and January, the seasonal contrast is very apparent. Add to that a great variety of trains, from hotshot intermodals to coal, grain, potash, mixed merchandise, and the Rocky Mountaineer. This is Canada's Fraser Canyon. Today's journey will begin near Hope, BC, where trains leave the lush Fraser Valley and travel compass north to the confluence with the Thompson River at Lytton. On the railroad timetable, we are actually traveling west to east. Canadian Pacific Railway was first to build through the Fraser Canyon, reaching North Bend by 1883, then continuing east through Lytton and the Thompson Canyon, arriving in Kamloops by 1885. CPR chose the best possible route, following the northwest bank of the Fraser River from Cisco to Vancouver. To compete with the CPR, the Canadian Northern Pacific Railway, later to become Canadian National, also pushed through the canyon by 1915. They had no choice but to build on the less desirable side of the river. Both lines contain several bridges and tunnels, making an easy grade of 1% for the CN and 1.3% for the CP. Beginning in 2006, the two railways began a joint operation of directional running through both the Fraser and Thompson Canyons between Mission and Basque. This allows the running of longer trains while eliminating meets on both single-track CTC lines. Eastbound trains are routed over Canadian Pacific's Cascade and Thompson subdivisions, while westbounds use Canadian National's Ashcroft and Yale subs. Taking a look at the Cascade sub, we will begin at Katz, just west of the community of Hope. We will continue east through Hague, Yale, Spuzzum, and Hellsgate before reaching the crew change point at North Bend. From here, eastbounds travel over the Thompson subdivision, and we will visit Kanaka and the Cisco Bridge, where CP crosses to the east bank of the river. Our final stop will be at Lytton, where the railway leaves the Fraser River and enters the Thompson Canyon. Our eastbound journey also includes CN's Yale subdivision at Floods, Hope, Yale, Chapman's, and the crew change point at Boston Bar. Continuing east on the Ashcroft sub, we pass Conrad and the beautiful arch-span bridge over the Fraser and CP at Cisco. We round out our journey at Lytton and Lasha at the mouth of the Thompson Canyon. We have a lot of miles to cover and lots to see as we enter the Fraser Canyon. Although it's hard to see from this angle, A green over red or clear aspect is displayed on the classic triple target signals at Katz, a former siding on Canadian Pacific's Cascade Subdivision. The signals are set up for CP 8803 East. The 127-car mixed merchandise train will soon enter the Fraser Canyon. A remote-controlled ES-44 AC locomotive adds extra power to the middle of the train. Katz was a location of a 7,054-foot siding. It is one of several sidings on the Cascade and Thompson subdivisions that have been removed in recent years after directional running began. Both east and west control points remain, and Katz still serves as a nighttime flag stop for Eastbound Via Rail's Canadian passenger train. Crossing over to the south side of the Fraser River, a different passenger train approaches. The seasonal Rocky Mountaineer races west to Vancouver. Turning east on Canadian National's Yale sub, we are nearly directly across the river from where we shot our first scene at Katz, as CN 3072 West takes a grain train into the Fraser Valley. Returning to the north bank of the Fraser, CP 8815 East passes under a gas pipeline as it parallels Route 7 between Katz and Hague. Mount Hope rises above the scene, marking the northernmost summit of the Skagit Range. In its shadow lies the confluence of the Coquihalla and Fraser Rivers, and the community known as Hope. The 955-foot-long Fraser Bridge 13 was the Kettle Valley Railway's connection with the CPR on the far side of the river. Completed in 1914, trains used the lower deck of the bridge until the line was closed in 1959. The top deck was used for highway traffic, as it is today with the Trans-Canada Highway. On our January visit to British Columbia, ice forms in the frigid waters of the Fraser, and the drone of a four-stroke prime mover echoes through the mountains, announcing an approaching eastbound. The Canadian Pacific Line does not enter town, but passes on the far side of the river. Through the leafless maple along the north bank, we see an eastbound CN stack train slowly making its way through Hague, milepost 40.5 on the Cascade sub. Hague is a location of a storage track at the mouth of the Fraser Canyon, often used for spotting maintenance equipment. Explorer Simon Fraser arrived here in 1808, and the Hudson's Bay Company created a nearby trading post 40 years later, known as Fort Hope. The CPR built the first line in 1881, and later the Kettle Valley and Canadian Northern Railway arrived by 1914. The CNOR's route today is Canadian National's Yale Subdivision. In the winter twilight before sunrise, a westbound CP tank train crosses the Coquihalla River Bridge 4 as it enters Hope. The train fords the icy river on a single through truss span. This bridge originally crossed the Athabasca River on the Grand Trunk Pacific Railway east of Jasper, Alberta. It was relocated here in 1924 after the line was abandoned. Hope truly is a picturesque location, and Hollywood movies have been shot here, including Rambo: First Blood starring Sylvester Stallone. Returning to the season of summer, a westbound Canadian National crosses the bridge. It's a pleasant morning, and a family has decided to ignore the danger signs and walk out on the bridge. They obviously didn't realize that a 12,000-foot-long mixed merchandise train was approaching them at 30 miles per hour. There isn't much room on the walkway, and they are at the mercy of any shifted loads or dragging equipment from the 150-plus cars. Fortunately, this family was able to walk away unharmed, and hopefully a little wiser. We included this scene just as a reminder of the dangers of trespassing on railway bridges. Back on the CP, an evening eastbound knocks down the signal at the west end of Yale. Yale is another siding that met its demise after joint operations began in 2006. These rails have just recently been pulled off the ties and will soon be removed. According to Canadian Pacific's timetable, this was a 9,661-foot siding, one of several deemed as surplus by the railway in both the Thompson and Fraser canyons. Just like at Katz, the control points still remain at either end. CP 8815 East passes the former siding on a cloudy August afternoon with an empty grain train. The Cascade Subdivision continues east through the community of Yale, the site of another Hudson Bay Company trading post. Here, the railroad makes a jog to the east, following the course of the Fraser River upstream. CN 2842 leads a stack train through the winter scene. CN 2930, a remote-controlled ES44AC, brings up the rear of the train. As it passes, note the red marker light. A sheet of ice covers the bend of the Fraser near the Yale Tunnels at milepost 26 on the Cascade Subdivision. Looking across the river, the grade of the CN Yale Sub can also be seen running along the southeast bank. Being the first railway to build through the canyon, CPR chose the easier northwest bank of the Fraser. That being said, the job of boring out tunnels was no easy task. It took 18 months to blast the 4 short Yale tunnels using nitroglycerin. Ice hangs from a seep near the east bore of Tunnel 4 as CN 2892 races east of Yale. The third unit is a standard cab EMD SD70 wearing Illinois Central paint. Canadian National acquired the IC in 1998, giving it a north-south connection between Chicago and New Orleans. The train disappears into Tunnel 3, and we reposition ourselves for CN 2878 East as it passes through the two tunnels. The action isn't all on this side of the river. Looking across at the CN, a westbound intermodal train can be seen through the trees as it approaches the 2,104-foot Yale Tunnel. As the train continues west on the far side of the river, we reposition ourselves at the east end of Tunnel 2, one of the 4 Yale tunnels that can be found between mileposts 24.8 and 26. Extending 170 miles north of Yale, the Fraser Canyon was a major obstacle between Canada's lower mainland and interior plateau. Yet it was a pathway that cut through the rugged coast mountains, which cover nearly 1,000 miles from the Fraser Valley to the Alaska Panhandle. It was a water-level route for any railway who dared to punch through its granite walls. CN 2185 East passes through the 399-foot bore of Tunnel 3 at milepost 25.8. It's July 29th, and we have moved just east of the Yale Tunnels. Looking across the Fraser, a westbound CN stack train races the evening shadows that are filling the canyon. Returning to the same location in winter, the hardwoods along the tracks have lost their leaves, giving us a better view of CN's Yale sub. Ice flows downstream, breaking up in the rapids as the freezing water churns, trying its best to stay fluid in this frigid winter air. An eastbound CP coal train heads along the west bank with 152 empty buckets in tow. This train originated at the Roberts Bank Export Terminal in Vancouver, BC, and is returning to Sparwood in Crow's Nest Pass for another load of black diamonds. These trains are typically run in a 2x1x1 arrangement each way, with a radio-controlled locomotive in the middle and end of the train. This saves time and eliminates a need for switching. The rear DPU disappears from view as the train approaches Saddle Rock. Looking across the river, a westbound CP 170 car potash train heads downstream on CN's Yale Sub. Potash is mined in Saskatchewan and is headed for export at Roberts Bank. As the train passes, another winter storm is blowing through the coast mountains of southern BC. Snowflakes ride the icy wind through the canyon. We take a moment to thaw out by returning to the season of summer. We are now just west of Spuzzum on the CP, with the eastbound we first saw at Katz at the beginning of the program. The train disappears around a curve after crossing Spuzzum Creek Road, located just west of the siding. Dwarf Signal 150D guards the east switch of the 7,175-foot passing track. Around 8 inches of new snow has fallen overnight, and many of the trees still have a full load on their branches. The January sun tries to make an appearance in the southern sky, while CP 9702 East heads for Crow's Nest Pass with more empties. After departing Spuzzum, the canyon narrows as we near Hellsgate. Back on the CN, the Rocky Mountaineer passes through the 500-foot bore of the Chapman's Bar Tunnel at milepost 12.3 on the Yale Sub. It's a clear and cold morning as we continue compass north into the canyon. The temperature is around 3 degrees below zero Fahrenheit, or over 13 below Celsius. Either way, it's a cold morning. Down in the depths of the canyon, just west of Hellsgate, an eastbound CN stack train climbs the 1% grade on the Cascade Sub. On the other side of the narrow river, a string of double stacks are stored in the 6,040-foot siding known as Como. The winter sun reaches a far peak above the canyon as the train continues in the shadows toward a narrow passage known as Hellsgate. Named by Simon Fraser, the canyon walls here are only 115 feet apart, and the Fraser River rushes through at such a great velocity it is impossible to navigate. A footbridge crosses the river at this point, and access is provided by the Hellsgate Air Tram, which operates during the summer months. Opened in 1971, it uses 2 cabins carrying up to 25 people each across the canyon. Looking downstream, an eastbound CP grain train passes Hellsgate on its way to the crew change point at North Bend, while the sound of a westbound can be heard out of sight below us. Both CP's Cascade sub and CN's Yale sub begin near the same location, on opposite sides of the river. The division point on the Canadian Pacific is known as North Bend, while the CN side is called Boston Bar. The 2 locations were nearly isolated from each other, except for a cable ferry, until a 2-lane bridge was built in the 1980s. CP 8948 East is in charge of Train 602, an empty potash with 170 cars as it enters North Bend for a crew change. The train slows to a stop as the head end reaches the crew change point at the terminal about a mile east of our location. Within a few minutes, a Kamloops crew gets the train underway again. The rear of the train heads through North Bend, which we will show you in a minute. But first, a westbound Canadian National mixed merchandise train has just made a crew change at Boston Bar. It departs slowly so another crew can PK the train, a railroad term for checking pins and knuckles, also known as a roll-by inspection in the U.S. An old depot above the yard is boarded up and closed. It was built by the Canadian Northern Railway in the 19-teens. Boston Bar is still an early morning flag stop for Via Rail's westbound Canadian at 4:14 a.m. Its eastbound counterpart makes a nocturnal stop in North Bend at 1:16 a.m. Returning to the CP, a flashing lunar signal can be found at the crew change point at the west end of the yard. This is an away terminal for CP crews from both Vancouver and Kamloops. CN crews are taken by van to Boston Bar. CP 8815 East departs with a fresh crew for Kamloops as the train enters the Thompson Sub. Returning to winter, CP 9374 heads east after changing crews with more empty coal buckets for Crow's Nest Pass. After PKing the train, a CP employee heads for the warmth of the crew quarters, having finished his task on this cold January day. Crossing over to Boston Bar, CN Train 105 has just stopped for a crew change. High-priority intermodal trains are given a 100 series number, while mixed freight are usually classified as 300 or 400 series, 700 for coal, 800 for grain, and so on. With a fresh crew on board, the 105 begins a final leg of its 3,000-mile journey between Montreal and Vancouver. Another CN crew member PKs the train as it heads west. The name Boston Bar dates back to the Fraser Canyon Gold Rush between 1858 and 1861. It refers to a gold-bearing sandbar along the river. A large population of Americans here were nicknamed Boston Men, or Bostons. Two pigeons discuss which tracks have the best grain between the rails, as westbound train 889 departs Boston Bar behind a new GE ET44AC number 3072. The second unit is an older Dash 9 number 2699. Back in 2010, it suffered an engine failure under load and threw a piston through the roof of a house in Louisiana. Fortunately, no one was hurt in the incident, and the 2699 was repaired. This train originates in Melville, Saskatchewan, and is bound for Vancouver, BC. The grain hoppers are headed for export to California, and the train will be handed over to BNSF at Vancouver. Another new Tier 4 GE number 3085 is working by remote control mid-train. As the train departs, we head farther into the canyon. A summer rain falls in the Fraser Canyon between Boston Bar and Cisco. The track in the foreground is CN's Ashcroft Subdivision, which continues east into Kamloops. On the far side, Canadian Pacific's Thompson Sub follows the river from Kanaka to the Kiefer's Tunnels. An eastbound Canadian Pacific rolls through Kanaka near milepost 103.9. It is named for Hawaiian islanders who panned for gold along the Fraser in the mid-19th century.
– 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9. 103.9.
The train continues through the Kiefer's tunnels, and we dissolve to a winter shot at the same location. Winter storms off the Pacific Ocean leave a white blanket in their passing. This area is known for chilly wet winters and hot summers. Although out of sequence, CN westbound train number 105 is seen again, rounding a curve at Conrad, near milepost 105.7 on the Ashcroft sub. An EMD SD70M-2 number 8893 marks the rear of the 105 this afternoon as it heads to Boston Bar for a crew change. An icy breeze whips through the canyon, shedding the snow load from many of the trees on the far side of the river, while we wait for our next eastbound out of North Bend. Soon, CN 5690 rounds the curve at Kanaka as dusk begins to settle over the land. The train rolls through the Kiefer's tunnels at milepost 102.4 and 102.7 respectively, as it slowly heads toward the crossing of the Fraser near Cisco. One of the most noted features of the Fraser Canyon are the bridges near Cisco. The CPR was first to cross the river on the lower through truss bridge built in 1884, forcing Canadian Northern to do the same thing when they built through here in 1915. They not only had to cross the river, but also the rival main line. CN 2443 West crosses the Fraser at milepost 103.7 on the Ashcroft sub. Once on this side of the river, the train passes the Cisco Spur and CP connection, linking the Ashcroft sub with the Thompson sub, just in case a detour is ever needed. As the train continues to cross the bridge, the head end power passes below us. The 2443 is a GE C40-8M built specifically for Canadian Railways and one of 55 built for Canadian National in the early 90s. The former BC Rail also ordered 26 of these units, and you will see one on the point of a train later on. We take a closer look at the CP Bridge, officially called Fraser River Bridge 12, at milepost 101.1 on the Thompson sub. Often called the Cisco Bridge, it spans 528 feet across the river and is 142 feet high. It's the 30th day of July, and temperatures are in the upper 90s as a strong breeze whips through the canyon. The wind nearly drowns out the sound of an eastbound CN stack train as it approaches the Cisco Tunnel and crosses the river. The Fraser River churns below us as the muddy water forces its way around rocks and bends on its 854-mile journey to the Strait of Georgia at Vancouver, BC. This is the longest river in the province. From a rocky outcropping above the water, we catch a westbound CP mixed freight crossing the CN Bridge. Officially named Fraser River Bridge 11, it is 812 feet long, 220 feet high, and the arch spans 425 feet from end to end. The shadows are growing long in the canyon as we reposition ourselves for a shot of a westbound CP coal train, which slowly makes its way across the arch bridge. The wind picks up again as the coal train crosses, blowing coal dust out of the hoppers. The head end of the train appears momentarily through the trees, and we can see the connector track for the Thompson Subdivision to the right of the main line. On a different day, the westbound Rocky Mountaineer slowly crosses the CN Arch Bridge at Cisco. The engineer eases the train across at a nice slow speed, so passengers have the opportunity to enjoy the view. One of the many perks of riding Canada's premier passenger train. As the train passes, we also become part of the scenery and are greeted with waves and have our picture taken too. The people riding today's train have really lucked out with fantastic weather on this last weekend of July 2016. As the Mountaineer continues west, we again note the connector track, known as CP Connection. It was surveyed during World War II, but never completed until a fire damaged Canadian National's Arch Bridge in 1977. Continuing compass north and railroad east, the Rocky Mountaineer is seen again crossing the Fraser River Bridge 10 near the community of Lytton. This bridge spans 869 feet across the river and contains a pedestrian walkway. Lytton is the final stop on today's journey. Here, the clear water of the Thompson River mixes with the muddy Fraser. The stark difference in colors has to do with the path each river takes. The Thompson has several lakes along its course where sediments have the chance to settle down to the bottom, naturally filtering the water. A luxury the Fraser simply does not have. Standing at the confluence, it is neat to see how the two rivers mix together. Returning to January, the difference is much more subtle as a westbound CN stack train enters Lytton at milepost 97.7 on the Ashcroft sub. Earlier that day, we caught a maintenance of way worker dumping ballast off a storage track. A water tank existed in Lytton during the days of steam, as well as a station. In contrast to our July visit, an Arctic air mass has moved into the area, and the wind has a definite bite to it as we filmed these scenes. Founded during the gold rush of 1858-59, Lytton was originally known as the Forks. The small community today has a population of around 228. On a street located between the two railroads, we find this preserved CN caboose on display. The Canadian Pacific takes a higher route through town. Standing near the CN grade, we can make out CP 8828 East as it climbs into the Thompson Canyon. A surprise is coming toward us on the CN. Former BC Rail C40-8M number 4063 is in charge of a westbound grain train. Check out the engine's 4 ditch lights and class lights as it passes the west end of Lasha. BC Rail was a Class II regional railroad that operated between 1912 and 2004 when it was sold to Canadian National. After the loaded grainer passes our location, we hear the train's report from a nearby defect detector.
CN detector, Ashcroft, 9-7. No alarms. Temperature -1-3 C. Total axles 408. Speed 2-3.
Returning one last time to the eastbound CP track, a headlight cuts through the snow that is again starting to fall as nighttime comes to the Fraser Canyon. Our journey is over for now, as another day of rail fanning has come to a close. There is much more to see in the miles ahead as trains traverse the Thompson Canyon, but that's a story for another time. Until next time, thanks for watching.